So we're going to start with some cursory questions, such as your origin stories. Tell us about your career path. How did you end up right here, right now?
Yeah, so I got my start working in comics. I was a licensing coordinator at DC Comics, which basically meant I was a product archivist, and I did brand assurance, making sure Superman looked like Superman on all of the Six Flags coasters. It was a dream come true for me. I can't even explain how much it meant to me to be even allowed in the building, because I've been a lifelong comic fan. But I quickly learned they had a game department there. And over time, I segued and joined the games team at DC Comics. I moved to Los Angeles to do that, joined the creative affairs group, and did narrative design, working with amazing studios on the Batman Arkham franchise, Injustice, Fables. There were so many amazing games I got to work on during my time at DC. And I also got to do pitches for television and film and for games as well. From there, I wanted to fully enter the industry, so I moved into a production role. I joined Warner Brothers Interactive, where I finished out Injustice. I led the publishing efforts for Mortal Kombat X, which was another big dream of mine, because I played Mortal Kombat since I was a kid. So eventually I moved back to the East Coast, New York, and I worked at some smaller studios, including Dots, and then joined Avalanche Studios, where I worked for about 5 years. Eventually working my way up to being a principal producer. So I worked on Just Cause 4, I oversaw all of its DLC, and the forthcoming Contraband. And so recently, I decided to focus on my independent pursuits and take a try at that, and that's how I've landed on this stage with all you lovely people.
Wow, that's incredible. So you started at DC, and you were able to maneuver within DC.
Yes.
Into a more game-centric role.
Yes.
That's fantastic. That is so cool.
It still blows my mind.
Yeah, that's really fantastic.
Thanks.
Okay, Rohit.
We were running a venture fund that was investing in sports tech companies, and through that, gaming became a strategy of ours, first starting with game development companies and then esports, and this was back in 2015 or 2014. Eventually, what happened was Overwatch came out, which is a game that Activision Blizzard launched. It was one of their fastest growing games. And they had this large vision of franchising and bringing traditional sports-like entertainment to esports. And so through that franchising ecosystem, they wanted to localize it naturally. And so they sold franchises to a lot of traditional sports owners. And we ended up purchasing the New York franchise. It was a rather sizable investment, and at the time we thought we were just going to be investors, and then all of a sudden we're like, we have to form a team very quickly. So 2 days later, I was on a flight to Korea to recruit our team and set them up in LA, and branding and getting them all spinning up what we call the next generation of New York sports. And then a few years later, we bought the New York Call of Duty franchise and also run a Valorant team, which is a non-franchise league. And so that's how it sort of one step after another, it just happened.
That's so cool. So you started as financial and then moved into the esports space.
Yeah, it goes without saying. I used to be head of product at a company before, and I was doing various other developer before, and when you see the intersection of this, it's a lot of community development. I'm sure that's a word that all of us are going to say, and that's something that we felt very passionate about. The game industry in the U.S. is primarily centered around LA, and the reason of that is because the publishers are based there, and it's easy to, from an esports perspective specifically, not a lot of institutional capital was in the ecosystem. So if you wanted to form teams, you were sort of doing this on the ground as a community, and it was just easier being in LA. And so our vision was that, no, New York needs to be the home of esports. And so
yes, I love that energy. Yeah. And I think a lot of people can agree with that, for sure. New York is not traditionally known as being a game city like the West Coast is, but I think that is very much subject to change.
Correct.
Because of stuff like this, absolutely. Cool. Anya?
My origin story is a lot of F around and find out, to be totally honest. So I studied at a classical conservatory. I studied saxophone. I studied classical saxophone, which is a thing, believe it or not. And I technically never graduated. I'm like a science class short of getting just my like bachelor's. F around and find out. So I worked in the music industry back home in the Bay Area for a couple of years and was like, wow, they really like don't treat women really well. This is like really sad. And so I was pretty upset, really depressed, really miserable, and started applying for jobs just in like various other places. And I wanted to do A&R, artists and representation for specifically indie musicians and just like musicians in general. And this job opportunity to do essentially A&R, which is code for developer relations, for a little website called addictinggames.com popped up. And I got the job, and I sort of quickly realized that representing indie games, indie devs essentially, is like really no different than representing artists in any facet. Creators, indie creators, dev, music, art, film, whatever. Everybody's an artist, and they should be treated as such. We shouldn't just be like putting people into boxes. So I worked at Addicting Games for a really long time. I was then moved from San Francisco to New York City because we were bought by Viacom. So I subsequently worked for Nickelodeon. And I realized the corporate life is not for me. So again, turn to F around and find out. So I applied for this job at Kickstarter, and that was almost 6 years ago. I had a really fun, weird interview. It was wild. And I worked my way up to now being the director of games at Kickstarter, where I'm responsible for the entirety of the games category for the #1 crowdfunding platform. I don't really know what's next, but we'll see what happens.
Love that. That is so cool. And I think the takeaway here is you can start anywhere and transition into games, right? Everybody started somewhere different and then transitioned into games, which I think is really important to remember. Anything you learn at any other job, you can transfer and translate into the game industry. Easy. So it's good to start somewhere, get the wheels going, and then you can make your transfer into the game industry for sure. All right, and the next question is, and this is probably the most important question, is why games? Why work in games? Why work in games when there's so many other fields out there? Victoria.
Man, because it's such a hard question.
I know.
I think games are a really social medium. They're really the only truly interactive medium where you are part of what is happening. And games can do so much beyond just telling stories the way that they're immersive. They can just reach anybody of any age, of any person. So I just think games, I don't know, I just will never forget that first time I like held the Atari controller in my hand, and like, it's just something that resonates with me, and I wanted to really be part of this thing that I thought was just so special.
Did you initially feel like you wanted to work in comics, but once you started touching on game dev stuff, you were like, oh, this is it?
It's a little bit like what Anya was saying, is like I studied film and like documentary film in college, but I knew in my heart I wanted to pursue that, but I also just loved these things. And so when I got to see what the games were, and I got that taste of game development for the first time, it was like an itch that just needed to get scratched.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I fully subscribe to Anya's methodology of F around and find.
Yeah.
That has worked stupendously for my career, honestly. So it is a good path to follow. And why games?
Yeah, I think the word games now encompasses so much, right? There's esports, there's game development, there's blockchain games now and NFTs, there's production for games, there's content for games. Like, New York Times is now running an art, or looking for a writer in games. I don't know if the person got hired. It's culturally important. Like, it's no longer something that's, niched or like a random community that should be ignored. It's sort of all of us at this point. And so from a more like business standpoint rather than personal standpoint, which everyone remembers the first time, like I study electrical engineering, and in engineering, a lot of us are gamers. But from a business standpoint, it's sort of fascinating how gaming is taking over the world. And you look at what happened last year when everything shut down and traditional sports went quiet. What did everyone do? They went on Twitch, right? And they use gaming as a method of interacting with each other. Why is Facebook investing in the metaverse? It's because that's where people are going to hang out. And when you look at Epic and Play Island, why are they doing that? It's like, it's not because of playing Fortnite, it's because that's where we're going to hang out in the future. And so, I feel gaming owns everything. Music is happening there. Merch is being released on the NFTs and games.
It really is a form of media that's touching everything. Yeah, that's a great answer.
I feel like there's two reasons, and I could talk about this forever, so please feel free to cut me off.
No, go on.
So one, I think it is the most authentic form of storytelling. And I mean that from the sense of like, you can watch a movie, but the movie's gonna be the same beginning to end. You can play Dungeons and Dragons, and it's gonna be different every single time. So it's the most interesting way to tell a story in so many different ways, right? You can, and similar to a video game, you can play a video game and you can play it without any side quests, but then you can play it a second time and then do half the side quests. And you can play it a third time and do all the side quests and not even do the main story, right? Like, there's so many different ways that you can immerse yourself in a storytelling experience, and I don't know of any other medium that's like that. Even in like a music standpoint, right? So 12 notes to a scale, there's only so much you can do in that aspect, right? You can improvise as much as you want, but then you still have like a handful of limitations. Secondly, I think that it is a form of art that is still new, and it's still growing and developing, and it's such an exciting thing to be part of an artistic medium that is so new that we are constantly shaping it and changing it every single day that we get to go to our jobs. I think that is such a cool thing to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. Truly. So obviously, when you work in games and you tell people you work in games, how often are people like, oh, so you play video games all day, right? So to set the record straight, let's go over what you guys do in your roles day to day. Let's hit them with the reality of it. We'll start with Victoria.
Well, so when working in a studio or even at a publisher, being a producer, usually every day you meet with your teams and you do this thing we call a stand-up. This comes from Agile methodology. It is 3 magic questions. What did you work on yesterday? What are you working on today? And what are you blocked by? Because as a producer, your job is really to facilitate your team to move forward, help craft those plans to make sure there is a finish line, help decide what that finish line is, and then help your team get there. So it's a lot of coordination. It's a lot of walking the floor, checking in with your team, seeing what they need. Sometimes just taking them for a coffee break if you notice they're just having a tough time. And really just like, there's a level of management there and people skills of just trying to understand, how can I help this person make their day better and therefore make our game even better. You're meeting with literally everyone, whether it's QA, whether it's artists, whether it's the game director, even the business people, the finance people. A producer works with every single person in the studio. And then, yes, you do get to play games. However, there's a reason why QA ramps up over time. QA is quality assurance. Those are our amazing testers, which means the polished, beautiful product that gets out there to all of our players, we don't get to play that until the very end. Most of the time, we're playing something very rough, very broken. It does not have any sort of final assets. You can spend time trying to complete something that, the logic we didn't finish that yet, but okay, you got to that part. Good to know. You're like, okay, cool. Thank you for telling me. So it's a lot of coordination. And then as a solo indie dev, and now I recently sold a book, so I'm also writing. So as a solo dev, it's also coordinating. I have a small indie team that I talk to and work with, and then the collaborators on my book as well. So just lots of working with people and a lot less playing games than you think. But we do talk about games a lot, and that is really fun.
And that is really fun.
Yeah.
I love to be in Slack talking about games.
Yes.
That is definitely a bonus.
We're currently in the off seasons for our titles. So I would say every week in esports, which is a startup constantly, is different. There are different fires you constantly have to deal with. These days, it's around assembling new teams, changing players, and getting contracts signed. So one big thing that's happening in Overwatch is next year it's Overwatch 2, and they're going from a 6v6 to a 5v5 game. So there's a lot of conversations around what does that mean in terms of who you're looking for in players, because no one knows, the game isn't out. So we're taking a guess on that. And then we are working on our NFT strategy, so we've been able to get a license to do Call of Duty IP NFTs, which is great. And so it's a lot of working with your creatives to understand how should that come up to life and how does creative. So, it's very, you sort of need to play all hats in an esports team. It's a rather small team. We have sponsorship, marketing, merchandise, and you have to coordinate. Okay, you have an event. You need players to fly in. You need to put on tickets, make sure everyone's COVID safe, get the merch there, and there are supply chain issues in the world. So just trying to constantly deal with those things on a day-by-day basis.
Yeah, geez, no small task.
Yeah.
No kidding. How about you?
So, I mean, my job is really unique and it's a little bit different than I think anything else in games, so it's a little bit difficult to answer. So I'm sort of like a hybrid. I hate the term biz dev, but like at the end of the day, if you just look at it from like a typical standpoint, that's kind of what my job is, but gross. So it's a little bit of a hybrid, like biz dev, account manager. Like it's really weird. It's very businessy, but a lot of it is like typical, just like answering emails, answering Slack messages, working internally. So I do a lot of like representing Kickstarter to the creator community, but then also representing the creator community to Kickstarter. And so it's this really interesting like hybrid role space. I do a ton of creator calls. Like I got to have a call with the Satanic Temple today, and it was amazing. It was the greatest moment of my life. Oh my God. So it's super fun when I have these like cool creator calls where like I have to like take a little bit of a step back and be like, don't fangirl over this person. But I'm like, I really like what you guys are doing. Oh, you want to do a game? Okay, that's cool. Like, just like be normal. So it's every day is a little bit different, but it is just sort of like, I'm on the screen all day long and it gets to be really exhausting. And I'll be totally honest, when I'm staring at a screen all day long, I don't really want to stare at another screen. So sometimes there's days where I'm just like, I need a break from video games. Like I just need to I need a minute to not do this. So that's kind of where the cool side of like working also in the board game space, I get to be like, let's play a weird board game. So like that's kind of a good break from things because it can just be taxing all day staring at a screen.
I think, obviously, to work in games, you should have a cursory knowledge of what position you want to do within games. You don't even have to know straight away what you want to do in games. A lot of people like start in marketing and go, oh, actually, like, not super into like the creative side of games marketing. I'd rather be like, in production or, I think the great thing about the game industry is it allows you, once you're in, to kind of like figure out what you want to do and you can kind of move around internally. So we know that we need like cursory skills. If you're going to be a games writer, knowing how to write is a good start, right? But what are some soft skills you need to work in games? And Victoria, you kind of answered this with your last response about, your role, a good soft skill is when you see somebody is stressed, kind of pulling them away from the project and like taking care of them. So what other soft skills do you think are important to work in games?
Yeah, there's a ton. Being really well organized, I think, is something that's really underestimated. So much of what we do is about a schedule, and whether you're making a schedule or you're giving your estimate as a developer, if you're a programmer, if you're a sound designer, being able to know how much time it takes you to do something, and being organized in your tasks. So organization is a big one, and also being able to both give and receive feedback. Games are very collaborative in the nature of how you make them. So being able to present your work, have an open mind to hear feedback that you get, because at the end of the day, everyone just wants to make the best game that they can. It's hopefully, usually, coming from a really good place. So how do you hear that feedback? How do you make sure, okay, well, here was my vision for the level I was making, but here's the feedback I got. what do I take away? And then also being able to give feedback to others. Say you are an artist and you request a shader from a technical artist. Being able to understand the work that they do, even if you can't make shaders yourself, but being able to give them that feedback to help them with your request to make that shader, for example. So giving and taking feedback is another really important soft skill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the game industry, as I mentioned, there's virtually every single role, be it sponsorship, right, sales, or merchandise. The answer is honestly no different than any other job. You need to be humble, know that there's a lot of other people who are way smarter than you, and like learn. And I will say, I go back to this statement, is like games are community, and really be passionate, like understand why do you want to be in this industry, be it a sales job or running Twitter accounts or running TikTok or whatever it is. Like it truly, you should not be doing anything if you're not truly passionate about it. That's regardless of games or not. And there's just so many different job opportunities across the whole industry. It's really cool to see, and hopefully in New York that continues to increase at a very fast clip. It's been on the low, smaller end, but I suspect that's going to change over time. And find the right role. And sometimes you might end up at a production job that's you don't find interesting, but it's a doorway into the industry, and you meet people, be open-minded, connect. Like most, at least what I've seen is that most people involved in games are very helpful to one another. So maybe if you didn't find the right role, ask for help. Like I'm looking for XYZ, and maybe you'll get pointed the right direction.
Absolutely.
I would say everything that you two are saying is absolutely correct. I also just hate that we look at people's skills as soft skills. Like, I just think that's ridiculous. Like, it's a hard skill. Communicating is hard, right? It's real hard, and it takes practice, and you have to sort of do it daily. But that is always like the number one thing. Any relationship, if it's platonic, professional, or romantic, communication is always the one thing is why like things break down, right? So I think that is like fundamentally a hard skill, but it is one of the most important skills that anybody in any job in any role can have. I don't care if you're like, I'm gonna get into the games industry and I'm gonna be a solo dev and I'm never gonna work with anyone. You're adorable if you think that's gonna happen. You're gonna have to learn how to talk to people. And that can be scary and daunting, especially if you're like, I know that I work better alone. Too bad. Like, sorry to say it, but too bad. Communication and learning to communicate is, along with organization, is the absolute most important thing to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Could not agree more. So the last time we did this panel was about 2 years ago, so pre-pandemic, and a lot of questions came from up-and-coming New York City developers who were like, well, I really want to work in New York City, but New York City isn't traditionally a games city as we know it. We do have a bunch of studios, but with like the post-pandemic landscape, do you guys think that hiring is going to look different from here on out?
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing it's changing. Not every place, but a lot of places are certainly much more open to the idea of remote work. And then in general, like, despite everything, video games sold really well. Like we were talking about, like that was something people could do during this time where we're all at home. And so we are seeing continued growth of the games industry in New York. So I think we're only going to be seeing more opportunities arrive here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think New York City or the tri-state market's an incredibly important market to most publishers, at least AAA publishers, right? And not that I know for sure, but hiring has also been very difficult for most tech companies, developers, and creatives. And I would not be surprised if a lot of those AAA publishers set up shop in New York to really tap into the incredible talent that is here. From other industries. We've hired from the digital media industry, and I suspect AAA publishers would say, we need creatives from New York, we need this thought process. It is a different thought process that's out west or otherwise. A lot of them have sponsorship teams here because obviously the whole media market's here. And so I think you'll continue to see the rise of that as more brands come on board and realize they missed the first wave of game sponsorship, and now they're looking to capitalize on that. So you could see, the New York Times, or as well as new up-and-coming media companies setting up to cover games and esports more and more, and hopefully these leagues actually become at the scale of some of the traditional sports where it's covered in the New York Post. And we have been covered occasionally. It feels great to be recognized as a sports team. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I think the pandemic has shown that we can all do our work remotely for the most part. There's obviously exceptions to that, but if it's just traditional office work, you can kind of do it from wherever. So I think the concept of work is starting to change entirely. But I also think it's important to remember that Twitch has an office here in New York City, right? They're headquartered in San Francisco, but they have an office. There are offices that exist. And I know this is a video game specific panel, but there's also a really good community of board game developers and people here too, right? I think that sometimes gets kind of forgotten about in New York City. But there's a if you go to D20, even where I live in Gowanus, Sip and Play is a great place. The NYU Game Center, I mean, obviously in-person stuff isn't really existing right now, but there's a ton of play testings and things like that. And that stuff I think is going to be even more important, especially as people sort of pivot to how do we make games post-pandemic in a way that maybe you don't have to actually touch things, right? Kind of what does that look like? Also, PAX Unplugged is based in Philadelphia, which is only an hour and a half away. So
yeah. I really want to touch on what you just said about board games being games. I think when a lot of people think about game development, they traditionally go to thinking about video games, which is fair, but board games are absolutely games. It takes game development to make a board game. And we do have a lot of that here in New York City that I think gets overlooked quite often. So glad you touched on that. Okay, and this is another broad question, but what do you guys think is the next big thing in gaming? Victoria?
I think we're seeing more and more specialization in games. I think, Anya, you had mentioned earlier, we're a young medium. And it's true, film has been around for over a century now. We've been around less than half of that, And so I think we're seeing the industry starting to mature, technology is getting pushed and pushed and pushed with the latest generation of consoles and graphics and all these things. And so I think now there's the opportunity that with so many games out there and so much amazing tech, we're starting to see more and more, not just art, but also considerations of the different types of games we can make and the different types of people who play our games. For example, if you're not familiar with Able Gamers, they're an amazing group. They have this thing called the APX, the Accessible Player Experience, that is all about teaching people how to make their games more accessible for different types of players who have different types of abilities. So there's things like that coming online. There's games that are trying to just be more authentic and really talk to the people that they're representing in their games. So this type of this specialization and almost moving a bit, evolving maybe from entertainment into more of this artistic idea and all recognition of these different players' bases. There's a lot happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think specialization is you're absolutely correct about that.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry. I lost track of what I was like.
Listen, I love your honesty. The question was, what do you think is the next big thing?
Oh, big thing, right. I think blockchain gaming and what that brings to the table with play to earn, it's basically a new business model for the games industry. And it's enabling people globally to actually make a real income without being an influencer. It's really incredible what the potential of some of these new models can open, not only for new game development, but also AAA publishers, how that brings communities together. What does the metaverse do for all these games? Like, maybe I don't need a stadium in New York. I could build it in the metaverse, and everyone globally can come and watch us play the game virtually, right? Who knows how that comes to life? I don't want to, like, in-person relationships, and that's the power of esports, is so powerful. So I don't want to like, that's what we're bought into, but I just think a lot of these technologies, as you allude to, the hardware is really pushing the limit. Even with cell phones, you're practically running with like a super powerful graphics card that rivals your graphics card in your computer 2 years ago, right? And so what that means for mobile development, reducing paying, what 5G does to bring people together who couldn't get broadband. It's like, we're starting to see what devs can do to capitalize on all these technologies merging together and unlocking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know if this is necessarily like the next big thing. I think it's more just a continuation. But I think watching our medium continue to merge with other mediums, right? So like a concert in Fortnite, for example, or like game properties becoming actually successful. Well, we'll see with Mario Brothers, but whatever. I just think it's a cursed property at this point.
It's cursed.
It's super cursed.
It's totally cursed.
Chris Pratt, really? Okay, sorry.
We'll talk about that later.
We'll talk about it later. I'm
circle back
sorry.
to that.
I can't. But I think I think the success of The Witcher was a great sort of like indication that the fantasy RPG world, transitioning that into more film and TV and things like that, I think that totally makes sense. I think we're just going to see, again, I think that as you spoke to earlier, games are, everybody plays games, right? The word gamer isn't tainted anymore. It's still a gross word, but it doesn't have that sort of like, whatever word we want to use that's associated with that term. Everybody's a gamer, right? Like, who are the most people that play mobile games? It's like moms, right? So seeing even like, Angry Birds movies, stuff like that, I think just combining those worlds is going to be just we're just going to see more and more of it. And the other thing is, I think the exploration of games to address health issues, whether it's mental health or physical health limitations, similar to what Victoria was saying, and taking a lot of that stigma away. I think using games as a way to kind of like educate and explain what things maybe that don't make sense, like using games as a way to kind of say like, this is how I'm feeling. If you play this game, this is what it feels like. Having that capability in games, I think exploring that's going to be much more common, especially as we're getting out of this nonsense that we're dealing with.
Yep. I co-sign that pretty hard. Okay, so I think we have time for like one more tiny baby question before we hand it over to you guys to ask the questions. What is one like nugget of sage wisdom or advice that you wish someone gave you early in your games career?
Wow, okay.
I know.
All right. I guess something that has really always been a really guiding force for me in my career is I used to do improv once upon a time. And for those who don't know, in improv, you form a backline with people, two people step forward, and you're supposed to make the audience laugh out of nothing. It can be pretty terrifying. But my improv coach told us that the one golden rule to think about once you step out in front of those people is you have one job. And your job is just make your partner look good. Because if they're thinking about how to make you look good and you're thinking about how to make them look good, you will reach higher heights than you could ever reach on your own. And that, to me, is what game development is all about.
Yeah, what a great answer. And it all comes back to just how collaborative game dev is.
Yeah.
Truly.
I would say a lot of people ask me how do I get into like maybe esports specifically. We don't build games, and I think the beauty about esports is that there's so much you can do without needing a team or a company to work for. And what I mean is like influencers are looking for mods. You can build a community on yourself with your own friends, and it's just like just do like. People will find out when you're passionate about the thing you want to do. And we've hired so many social media managers because they cut content for our players, and they do it, and we see the quality of content, and we're like, can you please introduce us to that person? Or we hire people from who are moderators of their Discord channels or servers. And I think it's the community development. It's like people, you see it in New York, the LAN centers are coming back. Like, go hang out, go meet people. I know it's easier said than done, but I think it's much, rather than saying, how do I get in, just do, and then you'll be noticed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think probably, it's so cliche, but like, don't be afraid. I think like, one, being a woman, and then two, being a biracial woman in games sometimes can be a little bit scary, because I think there's a lot riding on you when you're marginalized of, I can't mess up, because if I do, I'm representing a whole group of people. And I think the other side of that, though, is like, if you just kind of own when you do mess up, like, that speaks so much more than not even taking that first step of like, but I'm so scared that I'm gonna do something wrong. I'm so scared that I'm gonna do something wrong. And like, you're human, it's fine, it happens. You're gonna mess up, it's totally okay. Own the mistake, take what you've learned and move on. But I just kind of think back to so many instances in my early days in my career where I was just absolutely terrified and stood in the back of the room and didn't say anything and made sure I was quiet and played the role that I thought I was supposed to play.
Absolutely, and I was the same way early on in my career, and looking back, it's very easy for me to tell that was extremely detrimental to my growth. I could be probably so much farther along, I think, in my career if I didn't hold myself back by being afraid. So I think that is like really important to kind of instill, no matter who you are, because it can be scary. You're finally in your dream career, right? And those first couple days of a new job is like scary for anybody, right? It's like the first day of school. It's weird, but it's definitely like really important to just like put yourself out there. And you're not going to get in trouble. Trust me, because you're in a room full of like, for the most part, other people that are fully scared. Okay, so I think it is time to take questions from you guys. We'll start with you.
What's up? Oh, this is weird. Hi, I'm Jenna, and I'm studying at Rampo College, majoring in communications with a concentration in writing. And if I didn't want to get into film, I wanted to get into video game writing. So do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, actually. So one of my friends who's a game writer got into it by you just need to be published. If you've published something, that is something that can get your foot in the door. Dear friend of mine who's worked on many, many games as a game writer, his first published project was greeting cards. And then from there, he segued into the games industry. Others I know, there's lots of like online contests, there's small freelance work where you maybe don't need necessarily to have a big portfolio to get those writing gigs. But once you get that first published work, you can then start applying for the bigger studio work. Also, too, don't forget there's plenty of indie devs who need writers. So that's also a route you can totally go if you want to be a video game writer.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to touch on what you said, you and I have very similar majors as far as education goes. And I actually got my start in my first like proper games job doing games writing. I started out doing games journalism for just online media outlets, and then got into a studio doing some like indie level like game writing, and decided I didn't love it. And I thought I was gonna love it, and I didn't. And so then I segued into more of the creative marketing sector, and that's where I live now. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Greetings. My name is Errol Davis. I'm from Jamaica. I migrated here to do coding in college. So right now I'm studying video game animation. And I just wanted to ask about how it looks for international students when it comes to the game industry, like their route mostly, because it's really, they're going for diversity, and us as international students coming into a country don't know where to go. How would we go about that?
Okay, yeah, that's a really great question.
Yeah, so I think functionally, I think when we're talking about visas and things like that, I think that's more of where things get hung up on when we're talking about international students, right? I think that you will want to look for a company that's willing to work with you on making sure that you're going to keep your visa up to date more than anything else. I only say this because that is something that we talk about significantly at Kickstarter. We had somebody who was deported and we did everything to keep him.
Wow.
And it was absolutely devastating. He was a good friend of mine, and it sucked. It sucks watching that happen. So I think the cool thing about being an international student in New York is you have a huge community of other international students, and so you can talk to other people and like kind of get insight onto what other companies are looking at.
And I will say, I know a lot of companies based in New York City personally that do a great job in regards to handling all the visa stuff for their talent. And you don't have to even be like mid or senior level. I know that like if you are a strong entry level candidate, which it sounds like you are with your background, in your continuing education within games, I really think you could find a good fit pretty easy.
I don't have
Go ahead.
I have a tangential answer to this because we deal with a lot of international players and coaches. And the biggest issue is like when you submit an application, you have to prove like you can't find that person in the US.
Right.
And so what makes the application a lot easier is getting published somewhere. Like make it easy for your visa application to get approved. So even if that's in your school newspaper or whatever it is, do something that they can allude to look at, hey, this is a person we really want, here's why. And we've unfortunately had to like miss out on coaches because they're just unknown. And the visa it's been very, very difficult in the COVID times especially, because not only the visa, then you have to do the interview and everything gets delayed. It's been
That's really great advice.
yeah.
Right. Thank you so much.
You're so
Very
welcome.
helpful.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello, my name's Zach. I'm a published author, and I'm currently getting my master's in narrative design and screenwriting. What advice would you give? Because I'm still struggling to get an internship.
If you haven't yet looked to see what there is outside of New York for remote opportunities, that's certainly one. I would also encourage you to look off the beaten path. Not necessarily indie, but maybe not some of the bigger studios who maybe don't get as much love and as much publicity. If you've got that niche studio that you know and you love, check them out. Try DMing them on social media. And also, if you come at it from a professional way, not just like, I love your games, but hey, I'm really seriously pursuing this. I'm also a fan. I've played your games. Sometimes people will reach back out to you. So you can also try these alternative methods of reaching out to them, whether it's their LinkedIn page, their Twitter page, their Facebook page, if you're not seeing the sort of postings you're looking for.
My name is Glenn Caulfield. I live out on Long Island. I'm not actually a student. I'm a litigation attorney. I've been practicing for 6 years now, but the pandemic has thrown my particular field of law into chaos, and I'm looking to move on to something more in line with my passions. And each of you kind of stated at the open that you've transitioned from one industry into another. So my question is more of, how do you go about doing that and transitioning from an unrelated career into something related to games?
You F around and find out. I mean, I'm actually like totally serious. This is the sort of like dirty secret of games. Most of us don't go to school for games.
Yeah.
Like, that didn't exist when I was in college 400 years ago,
Yeah.
right? Like, I'm basically an eternal vampire. You'll never guess my age. It's fine. This whole concept of going to school for games is so new. And I don't even really know what it looks like and what it actually means.
Neither do I.
Right. And so a lot of it is like, it's an art form, it's weird, it's different, it's unique. If you don't know what you want to do in games, I actually don't recommend like trying to get a job in games right now. I think it's important for you to figure out what it is that you want to do. So do you want to do sound design? Do you want to be a producer? Do you want to be like, what is it that you want to do? And like, study your ass off on what it is. And a lot of it is just showing up in spaces, right? So my partner is a professional musician, and he has worked his ass off to get where he is. And a lot of it is he just brought his trombone, and he just showed up in spaces and was like, I'm going to sit in and play. You don't want me? Totally cool. I'm going to come next week. Maybe you'll have time for me next week. So a lot of it is just showing up and saying, like, I want to be here. I want to prove to you that I want to be here. The challenge, it sounds like, is finding what that is. But here's the other cool part about games. It's a very small industry. We all know each other to some degree, and so you have a lot of people that are going to be willing to help you.
Absolutely. And you made the correct decision by coming here tonight. That is a correct step forward. And if it makes you feel any more hopeful, I personally know two litigators who felt the same way you did and got jobs as lawyers in game studios, and then from there transitioned into being project managers. So I've seen it. It can happen.
Okay.
You also probably have like an amazing set of skills that are necessary in the game space.
Right. Like, I know part of my job involves writing, and not just writing well, but writing persuasively. So one thing that I've personally thought about is transitioning into writing, if not in a, like a legal counsel, in-house
Right.
counsel situation. So
Yeah.
I do have some idea as to what I'm looking to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Like she said, just like break down your skill set as a litigator, like really break it down into like word soup and see who you are, like that, like the culmination of like who you are and what your skill set is, and see how it applies to roles in the game industry. I mean, if not writing, you could probably be very successful in biz dev for a game company for sure.
The required skills that they list for internships and entry-level positions are really hard to get when you like exit school, and especially if you're in a different field of study. So do you have any tips on like how to get those skills and get like the software experience? And I know a lot of game people are like, oh, you have to ship a game, but how do you get into the industry if you can't get into the industry to ship a game?
Right, I know, and that's like a classic conundrum is when you look at entry-level job listings, it's like 10 plus years experience required, and you're like, okay, how do I get that?
Yeah.
And that's tricky, I know, and it's like, it's hard because, I'm trying to think. It's hard because I think we are getting away from that a little bit. I know a lot of studios that are more, like they lend more grace to truly entry-level people. But a good tool that I suggest to anybody that is looking to build up skill sets, just to jazz up their resume, to be like, I know this software, I know this, this, and this. I've taken, like marketing courses that are, or don't go with my degree, but I use Coursera all the time to continue my education. I like fully learned Photoshop through Coursera and YouTube. The University of YouTube is very helpful. So I highly suggest that. And Coursera allows you to take like college level, globally, like different colleges, allows you to take courses for free. It is a tool that I lean on and suggest to people all the time. So I don't know if that helps you, but Coursera, there's lynda.com, but that's paid. But Coursera, I swear by. So if you're like, I really want to get proficient in like these 3 programs, you can do a Coursera course, and that's really helped me.
You can get Linda from the New York Public Library for free.
Can you really?
Yeah. And what internship, when you say, like when people say I want an internship, I think it's helpful to say in X. So what's that in X?
Mostly like art-related careers and things, but I know that a lot of the softwares they expect you to learn are paid and very expensive and don't really offer like student discounts or anything.
When we have a lot of creatives who need to create our social media posts, and when people apply, what's the way to cut through kind of the volume that comes in is create a portfolio, right? And so I think having your portfolio buttoned up, and if you want to do in games, a specific, like be it FPS games or whatever it is, do art around that, right? And that's one side of it. There are Discord communities probably around those types of games. Go in, like show your art. People are probably going to recognize it. And I would say DM the companies that have the paid software and say, I don't have money, here's my art, please support me. And sometimes they will. Like they put on student, I think Adobe has a pretty good program, I think.
Adobe does, I'm pretty sure, yeah.
So don't quote me on that, I'm not entirely sure, but I think they will, there's somewhere to apply to get a discounted, if that's the software you're referring to. But
Yeah.
there are always free versions, right? Open source versions that might not be the best of the best, but at least you can do that route as well. Like
Also-
from MATLAB, you have R, right? And whatever.
To add to that, if you know a tangential program, it's maybe not the exact same one, but it does similar work, I would still apply if I were you. If you have a friend, hey, do you want to swap skills? I'll teach you mine. If you teach me yours, you can borrow my thing, whatever.
Yeah.
Swap skills with friends. And in terms of Shift Games experience, go to a game jam or, help out on a friend's indie game. I've been a hiring manager. I do consider those things. So while it makes it seem like, oh, I need that professional Shift game, I totally would look at someone's undergrad work, if they made something in their free time, they had an indie team, they had a thesis project. All of these things are applicable experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't get so overwhelmed by like these very official sounding job listings. I really think that if you have parallel experience and you're just honest and be like, I need the software to learn, but I know how to use this very well, that shows that like you can learn.
Sometimes when there isn't a listing, but you love a studio, let's say there's one studio you really love and they don't have any internships or whatever, create an art and send it to the creative strategist or whoever somewhere and say like, here's what I can do. I would love to work for you.
Yeah.
And put everything on Twitter.
Yes. Yeah.
Put everything you do on Twitter. Twitter is a horrible place, but like, it's where all of us are. We're all DMing each other and talking to each other all day too. And also, I would definitely put stuff on itch.io just to have something there because there's so many people that just look around itch for creative purposes.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to something Victoria said, and this goes for everybody in the room, that game jams are so good. Game jams, if you can network with people, find a group of people to sit down and do a game jam with, that looks so good on your resume, in your portfolio. I can't stress how important game jams are for people early in their career.
The last thing on top of Twitter, if the studio or the game has a subreddit, I would post it there too.
Hi, I'm Shar Kumar. I'm an NYU student at computer engineering. And I kind of wanted to just like ask this as a question that kind of expands after what you were saying a little bit. Specifically, like, what are you looking for in internships for like students who are applying to these different like programs and like things that you guys run? Like, what are you looking for specifically? Like, is it like experience? Is it like undergraduate like specific kinds of like classes, courses? Like, what would I need to like show that I'm able to do so that you would be like, yeah, I would like to move you to an interview phase so that we can like start to think about like a hiring process?
Yeah, and I think we're probably all hiring managers in this room. Yeah. So for me personally, when I hire people, I always look for things that you were not required to do but did anyways. So things like game jams, side projects that you do that are parallel to the job you're applying for, like if it's something game related. Anything that you're doing out of passion, if you list Coursera courses that you took. Like I didn't get to take these classes in my traditional education, and I personally don't really care about someone's traditional college education so much as I care about like what they're trying to teach themselves. So if you list that I took these courses, I went to these events, I host a game dev meetup, any passion project that you're not required to do but you are doing anyways because you love it, like goes a very long way.
Hey folks, I'm Owen. I'm from New Jersey. I'm a senior studying communications at NYU and a global marketing strategy intern at 2K. And this question is definitely for Victoria as a producer, especially in AAA, that space. But I'd really love to hear from everybody. Working sort of as that middleman between the business side and the creative side, and doing a lot with marketing teams as well. Are there any sort of like tactics or best practices that you've seen when collaborating with marketers that have really made you think like, oh, this person really has my best interests at heart. Like this is a good person to work with, stuff like that?
I think that that you're all on the same team when you're all speaking to the same vision, and when you can tell everybody is giving feedback in good faith and speaking to the pillars of the project. Pillars is a phrase we use, these are the main things that the game is about. Whether it's the story, the mechanic, etc. When it comes to those sorts of discussions, making sure that you're all talking about the same thing and that you are talking to the same goal. Because if you're not doing those things, that's where the friction starts, and that's when you realize, actually, maybe we're not all on the same page here. And that can totally happen, and it can happen all the time. Sometimes it's just because communication got broken down, or sometimes it's just because people think their view of the game is the way the game should be. And that is a thing that can happen. And so it kind of goes back to like, what do you do in that situation? Is, giving feedback and receiving feedback and just hearing what everyone's talking about. And then if you feel like people are drifting off course, bringing them back to those core pillars and that shared goal. Because once you refresh everyone, here's what we're aligned on, here's what we're working towards, that sort of does like a nice reset. And that extends beyond, marketing and production. That's with any group. As long as you're really clear about what the shared goal is, you're all trying to arrive to that shared goal.
Mm-hmm. Hi there, good afternoon. My name is Edward. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I graduated from Fordham University, majoring in communication and media studies. So I know that as the gaming industry grows, so is virtual reality. What are the pros and cons that you think are going to come with virtual reality, and are there going to be a lot of opportunities in that industry?
I think we've been trying this for years. It hasn't hit for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
I think the biggest is that, one, it's already an inherently sexist thing because most women can't use VR devices. 60% of women get sick, which sucks. So like I'm one of them. I can't do it. I get sick every time I use VR. The devices are also incredibly expensive. It's not a price point that like if someone's like, I can't even afford a PS4, why am I gonna buy a $700 Oculus set? Oh, and I have to buy games on top of it. Like it's insane.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I will, however, say one of the things that I've seen in VR, and I am not a VR expert. This is just a complete like opinion. I've seen a lot of cool advancements in VR for medical. So I think using there's a study. They did a study on soldiers with PTSD. And they essentially replayed the trauma through the VR device, and they were able to decrease their PTSD by like 90% after like 8 times of them revisiting their trauma, right? And so using that as like gamifying that, I think is really interesting for like mental health and body dysmorphia and various other things that people are trying to kind of deal with. But for like the entertainment portion of VR, I just kind of think the ship has sailed.
Yeah, I have very similar opinions about VR, and I could go on about them for hours. But to keep it short, I think we've tried. We're not there yet. The price point really, it's a huge barrier to entry for most gamers. Like if you have that much expendable income to spend on a VR set, like good for you. But like most people don't, right? But I think VR could be very important for the exact reasons that she has mentioned. But I think in the game realm, we're a bit far off from that. If we ever land, I think we can focus maybe more on AR technology. Seems to be taking off a little bit more than VR.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. I'm currently a CUNY BA student. I'm doing medieval studies major and also a game design major. Sorry. So I'm studying to become a medievalist, and my question would kind of be like, what do you think the prospects for like historical games and/or content is, and also, where do you think someone who is in that field, such as myself, could like get a leg up or like start like maybe what studio or like what kind of job could like be useful with that?
Well, first of all, is your shirt dinosaurs?
No, it's monsters.
Oh, even better. I was
Thank
like, if you were wearing a dinosaur shirt, you are my best friend. So just so you know.
I do love dinosaurs.
I'm obsessed with medieval history. If I could go back in time and redo one thing about my life, it's I would study medieval history. So we can start a studio.
It's never too late, truly.
I will solve your problems right now. I'll talk
All
to
right,
you later.
we'll talk after, yeah.
Okay, we will. But to actually answer your question.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think one of the big discussions of topic with medieval games is armor, and having like historically accurate armor.
Yeah.
That's been like a really, really big discussion. So I think being able to speak to like, this is what battle armor actually was. This is what they would wear. This is historically accurate, right? I think that would be kind of cool and interesting. But like, how many medieval games exist? Like, you got a whole world ahead of you.
Yeah, I mean, also like my favorite game is like Legend of Zelda, like franchise. So like, I guess maybe could you say like there could be an archaeological aspect, because that's kind of like what my medieval thing involves too, is like archaeology. So like, I guess that could like cross over into the digital world, right?
Absolutely. Like think about all the Assassin's Creed games. They have an arsenal of people that are consulting on those games.
Right. Yeah. It was like I guess consulting can be a thing
Absolutely.
too.
Yeah, absolutely. That is like a very in demand, looking for people with specific expertise to consult on their projects.
Awesome. Good to know.
Yes, you will be
Yeah,
fine.
big plus one to that.
Yes.
Like if you bill yourself as like I'm an expert in this area and also I'm a game designer, like that is a very strong position to come and talk to studios and come on board as someone who would be able to be that type of a contributor.
So
Yeah.
I don't know if there are studios or not, if that's the role you're looking for, but I would say, and I sound like a broken record in today's world with what's happening in this NFT gaming space and tokenized communities and even like things like Roblox and Minecraft. If you want to get started, it's like what AWS did for startups, right? It's so much easier to start somewhere to say, here's my one version of a game that you like, which it makes it easier to build on like Roblox, or even just start a community of like who's out there that likes these types of games, and then maybe you can tokenize it or issue NFTs that eventually become like that funds the game development. And that's what's so cool about what's happening in this world, because people want to develop their own game. They're like, none of this actually speaks to me.
Right.
And-
Yeah, same. I want to
Right?
do like
So-
indie games or work in a studio, either or. But.
So what's happening is that people are saying, you know what, I'm the creative, I'm gonna come up with these NFTs that I'm gonna sell and issue. That effectively is money that you could use to fund game development and continue to, like secondary sales, like part of those transactions go back into the treasury. And there are a lot of really unique ways of how games are coming to life now that never happened before.
Awesome, thanks.
I don't think you want to look for a studio. I think you want to find other specialists. I would recommend looking at Kate Edwards. Her career is a great example of somebody who's like a geographer, and she's built a whole world, a whole career on just being like an expert at maps.
Yeah.
That's her entire career. So yeah, I think finding other specialized people. I don't think you want to just behold yourself to one studio.
I don't think so either.
See, now you're thinking. Yeah, absolutely. There's so much room in this industry for you to make yourself the medieval guy to
Awesome.
go to.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah.
I mainly wanted to ask like about Kickstarter because a lot of video games I played as a child, I practically was raised on the advent of isometric CRPGs, Pillars of Eternity, Banner Saga, Wasteland 2, titles that basically, started with Kickstarter. And I am currently like in the starting phases of developing a video game of my own. And I just kind of wanted to ask, I went over like the Kickstarter campaigns for all of these games. And then I also went over the Kickstarter campaign for Rat and Reich, a game that just came out. Like, I think they asked for like $30,000, and I've gathered like last time I checked like about 85, right? And as a person who wants to consider crowdfunding for his game in the future, before starting a campaign on Kickstarter, what things should my campaign have to be successful?
So you need to have 30 seconds of gameplay. That is absolutely key. Kickstarter is 12 years old. The days of just putting a GDD, a game design document, not going to happen any longer. There's, $6.2 billion has been raised on Kickstarter as a whole. 1.2 billion of that is in the games space, right? So there's a huge community on Kickstarter. So you need to have 30 seconds of gameplay. I also highly recommend having at least 40 to 50% of your development done. I know that can be a little bit daunting. That was a sound that happened. I know that can be a little bit daunting and a little bit scary, but there are great resources here in New York. Playcrafting is one of them that can definitely help kind of like get you to that starting point before you're ready to crowdfund. And then you come talk to me, and I'll help you the rest of the way.
Come to me and then go to her. That is the pipeline.
I just kind of like, where do I get experience? Where do I get contacts? Because I want to pick up a lot of technical skills for my career. And I realize this is something I want to do, but I also realize that I do not have the skills necessary. I do not have the coding skills, although I learned coding. I do not have as much writing skills as I want, although this is the first time I ever actually wrote something seriously.
Yeah. So there's a New York gaming Discord, and I would highly recommend that. again, playcrafting is a great sort of like centralized location of people that are part of the game space, whether it's hobbyists or people who are like full-time, this is what they do with their lives. I think what you're asking is how do you get to be part of the community, right? So part of it is, again, just showing up. I think Christy's probably a great resource to kind of get you just at that starting point of this is how you get into playcrafting.
Yeah, absolutely. And playcrafting also has a Discord that's purpose is to network devs with other devs so they can create their projects. So I think that could be tremendously helpful to you, and I'm happy to give you the Discord after this.
Yes.
Okay,
please.
I got you.
Hi, my name is Colin. I recently, well, not so recently, a couple months after the pandemic began, I graduated from Ramapo College in New Jersey with a degree in music production. Over the course of the last 5 years, I've been wanting to make music for video games. I even am in the process of making a video game song remix and making a couple of other songs that are going to be an original video game project that one of my friends is helping create. Well, technically it's his project. I'm helping to create it. I was wondering how exactly would I find the connections in the video game industry to be able to offer up my skills as a job type career?
Twitter.
Yeah, I don't use Twitter.
Well, I suggest that you do. I know it's
use it.
cool to be the I don't use social media guy, but if you want to network, you have to be the uncool I use social media guy.
I mean, Discord, Twitter, like part
Yeah.
of it is just you got to have an online presence of some kind. You don't have to be like you don't have to be a Rami level sort of person. But like a lot of it is just look at it from the perspective of like you have your portfolio, which is either your website or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, well, for me, and specifically, it's my music that I've already put up on Spotify.
Great. Spotify, great example. Twitter is an extension of your portfolio because unfortunately what happens is a lot of times people are going to look at, okay, who's following them? How many followers do they have, right? Unfortunately, this is kind of the age that we live in now of how successful are they to be able to kind of market themselves? Because how are you going to be an extension of whoever it is that you're working with? It sucks. It's a gross game. I kind of hate social media myself, but like, suck it up and play the game.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Romel. I'm a filmmaker. I just wanted to revisit blockchain gaming for a second. When you take a look at one of the most successful blockchain games, Axie Infinity, the gameplay is very rudimentary. Like
it's awful.
But it's changed so many lives, and I think recently they airdropped like $60 million to like early adopters, like life-changing money. Do you think there'll be a time where we have something like Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty on that type of level of like play to earn?
100%, and that's what's so exciting is that most of the blockchain games are NFT or blockchain people with zero game experience. And that's why you get those really awful game mechanics. And a lot of the NFT, like Parallel, if you know that project, a lot of them are going after Hearthstone or like similar type of card games, Magic of the Gathering. And to her point, like tabletop games are massive, right? And it's sometimes hard, like I realized the size of the industry. Someone told me it the other day, and I was just like blown away because, again, NFTs work really well on tabletop games as well. Long story short, I think that's what shows the potential with even not that many people play Axie Infinity in the grand scheme of things, right? NFT gaming, onboarding, it's really difficult. Web 3.0 wallets, like most people don't have to convert fiat into crypto is really difficult for a lot of people. And so I think that's, as the AAA publishers are looking at what blockchain means for their businesses, you will eventually start to see play to earn as well as these types of mechanics go, I would suspect, in the next few years. It's not going to happen soon.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it to happen soon for them because everything's chugging along very well.
Yeah.
But it's a huge revenue opportunity, and I think once they realize, if you buy a skin in this game, it transfers into that game, what that opens up, you start to like see what the potential of this could be. So I do agree, like current NFT games are really poor game mechanics, but I think if for people who are looking for internships, that is a massive growth area. These companies are flush with cash. They're trying to like hire at such a insane pace, and there's just no one. So if you, it is a game studio. They're just currently masked as NFT projects, but eventually it'll catch up to them, and they're all game studios.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. And I think that's all she wrote. Thank you guys so much for coming out.